Molasses is not the same as sugar, but the dose matters significantly. And we'll talk about exactly how much to use and when not to use it, because that's really important. But imagine being able to have a higher carbohydrate meal, and imagine being able to use molasses and changing the entire way that your body produces insulin. It is super wild, and the science is cutting edge, and it's really interesting to see what's unfolding with molasses, because even though it's a byproduct of sugar, you're actually leaving all the minerals and all the nutrition in the molasses, and the darker the molasses, the more beneficial it is. So we're going to talk about exactly how to use it. I'm going to give you the playbook. I'm also going to give you a few different things. I'm going to talk about when to use it, mainly for like insulin dynamics and how to change and have an impact on insulin resistance, when to use it for antioxidant abilities, and when to use it for sort of a carb blocker effect. Bottom line is it's better than sugar. There's a study published in the European Journal of Nutrition. So what they did is they gave subjects 5 test meals. One was a control, okay, or a placebo. The other ones had varying dosages of molasses along with this higher carbohydrate meal. At first, they're like, okay, it didn't really change the blood glucose much. But then what they found is that the more molasses that was added, the less insulin that was required. Let me say that again, because it is completely backwards from what we would think. The more of this sugar, molasses, that was added, the less insulin that was needed. Just to make sure things are really clear, like what we're after with improving insulin resistance and whatnot. Sure, we want to improve glucose control, but we really want to get rid of the chronically high circulating insulin. So why is molasses making it so that you need less insulin? This is sounds like a miracle. It seems to impact pancreatic beta cells by actually helping dysfunctional beta cells produce insulin again. So essentially the pancreas was operating at its full potential. This makes sense because when you dive deeper into this study, we learned something else. This is something that you can apply. The more insulin resistant or the more metabolically damaged that somebody was, the more that the molasses helped, showing that it's actually acting as like a superhero aid helping the pancreatic beta cells. This is exactly one of those things where you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, why you need to listen to details, because not all sugars are created equal. It's not necessarily about the sugar. It's more about the inflammatory response that occurs from garbage sugars. But the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition published something else. They found that molasses also slowed the uptake of glucose and fructose by intestinal cells. So there's also a slowing of basically taking up these sugars that might be hard to deal with. It's kind of funny because when things are left in their whole food form or in a concentrated whole food form like molasses, the more powerful they are. Now, we're going to talk about how much to use for this effect and also what kind. So with this, we start looking into the details. It seems as though when you're choosing a molasses for this particular case, you want to go with the darker molasses. So blackstrap molasses is going to have more potency when it comes to this. And that's why a lot of the studies look at either dark or blackstrap. Now, light molasses is still good, but it has less of the nutrients and less of the minerals. Now, there's a tipping point. It seems as though like a half a tablespoon to a tablespoon is where you want to be for this effect. So if you're potentially insulin resistant, then you want to pay attention to this. But there's other benefits to molasses, like a gastric emptying effect and even a potential like fat loss or weight loss effect. And it's going to be a little bit different in how you use for that dose, okay? So first off, let's look at another study that looked at glucose control. This study found that adding molasses to a higher starch meal, specifically to a higher starch meal, reduced the glucose spike, the GI, by 5 to 20%. Once again, in a dose-dependent fashion. The more that was added, the more the effect. But if you start going overboard, like over 3 tablespoons, then you start getting more of the actual sugar from the molasses superseding everything else, right? So it's like the smaller amounts of molasses help, but when you start going too far, there's still so much sugar in molasses at that rate that it's hard for it to actually get the job done because it's being overwhelmed by the sugar in the actual molasses. So the dose really does make the poison here. But let's talk about why this works, because it works upon an axis that's known as GIP, which is a gut incretin. And it does something really specific, and this is going to tailor how you use it. So it's really important to hear and understand this. So the Journal of Food looked into this, and they found that molasses increases what's called amylin. Amylin is released by a pancreatic beta cell directly alongside insulin. It's the job of amylin to essentially make it so that glucose absorbs a little slower. It slows gastric emptying, so it makes it so that insulin can do its job easier. Then you have GIP, which is released by the small intestine to essentially allow insulin to be released in a glucose-dependent fashion. So all these things communicate with each other. What we're finding is that molasses helps insulin do its job better by helping other things communicate with it. So it truly is like a control center in a way for helping us use insulin. You wouldn't really want to do this with dinner. Okay, you don't really want to delay gastric emptying with dinner, because what's going to happen then is you're going to kind of delay the potential second spike. So when you have carbohydrates, you have a spike, and then you have another spike. It happens afterwards, the second spike effect. Okay, you want to make sure that you're not having a big second spike after you're asleep. So using molasses to delay gastric emptying for potential fat loss, for insulin resistance improvements, you really want to be doing it with lunch. So it's a good time. You could do it with breakfast too, but it just makes sense with lunch, because then you can have your, I don't know, maybe a sandwich or something that has some more starch, and you can delay the gastric emptying of it. And again, you want to keep that dose around like 1 tablespoon or so. Remember, you're not trying to sweeten something with it. You're using it as a little bit of a tool. Now, we've seen similar stuff with allulose before. Remember, like allulose is technically a rare sugar. It's technically a sugar, but it has these metabolic effects. It seems like, well, molasses might be in a similar ballpark. So now we've learned about using it to help with insulin and when to use it for optimal weight loss. What about the fact that it's a very powerful antioxidant? The Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics compared molasses to sugar, corn syrup, and 11 other sweeteners. What they were looking at was total antioxidant score, so the total antioxidant capacity, but they were also looking at what's called the ferric reducing ability of plasma. Why is this important? What does the ferric reducing ability mean? It means that when we have iron gets turned into a storage form or a usable form. Okay, so it's the ferric or ferrous state. When iron is in its ferrous state, or when it's in a reduced capacity, it's more usable. But also, we have to remember that too much iron oxidizes things. What happens if you leave a dumbbell or metal out in the elements exposed to oxygen? It oxidizes and rusts. That's exactly what happens with oxidative stress. It's oxidating because it's reacting with oxygen. So we want to reduce that total iron amount. So the reason they measure this is because they want to see, okay, what is something's effect on the ferric reducing ability of plasma? Like, does it change how we utilize iron? And what they found is that molasses, blackstrap molasses, had the highest antioxidant score when it came to that ferric reducing ability. It doesn't sound like much if you're not kind of in this ecosystem, but I'm telling you, that is one of the most important long-term ways to potentially prevent inflammation and oxidative stress. So if you're looking at it from an inflammatory perspective, it's more of a longer term thing. How do you long term take this stuff in? And it doesn't really matter whether you're taking it with carbs or not at that matter. It's just about getting the antioxidant effect. Now, the type of molasses that you get is really important. Once again, I put a link down below for Thrive Market. They have different forms of molasses there. I recommend you get either a dark or a blackstrap molasses, but if you use that link for Thrive Market, it gets you 30% off your entire grocery order. So you can get molasses plus a bunch of other things, and you'll save 30% off and get a free gift. The reason that I trust Thrive Market when it comes to molasses is because they vet all their products. So they put them through the ringer when it comes to sourcing, when it comes to their ingredient quality. And molasses, just like any other sweetener like honey, you can find things that are kind of stripped of the nutrients just to make it taste better. So I trust Thrive Market when it comes to that. So that link is down below. It's in the top line of the description. It gets you 30% off your entire grocery order plus a free gift. So check them out. Now, there's another interesting thing that molasses does. It blocks the enzymes that break down sugar and starches. So it blocks, to a certain degree, alpha amylase and alpha glucosidase. These are the enzymes that break down carbs in our intestines. When those enzymes are not present, or they are in less amounts, it takes us longer to break down a starch molecule, which means that some of the starch molecule might even make it all the way through and just get into our colon and ultimately broken down by the microbiome, not even absorbing into our bloodstream. Then, of course, you do have some that's still absorbed, but it's absorbed at a slower rate, which again helps from an insulin perspective because you need less insulin because you're not getting a big flood of it. If you're insulin resistant, you want this to drip out a little bit slower. Bottom line, less sugar is absorbed in the intestines when molasses is added into the mix. So it's a literal natural carb blocker. It's not just like delaying gastric emptying. It's actually blocking the absorption of carbohydrates to a degree, even though it's a sugar. Now the big ones. This is to be able to share with the people that say all sugars are created equal. Every single calorie is the same as long as it's a calorie. There was a study published in Food Chemistry 2011 that found that the antioxidants that were in blackstrap molasses had anti-mutagenic properties, meaning it was affecting our DNA to the point where the DNA wouldn't mutate. There's a legit longevity benefit to this. something amazing happens when you actually get like food in its whole food form and the whole food matrix, right? And this is like a concentrated nutritional element that is extracted when we have refined sugar. It explains exactly why refined sugar is different from actual real sugar that came from the earth. The Journal of Agriculture Food Chemistry published a study that molasses actually protected liver DNA. So it's acting as a shield for the liver DNA. So we're having huge antioxidant effects here. Not to mention, it blocks something that's called the Fenton reaction. The Fenton reaction is a major catalyst when it comes down to oxidative stress. This Fenton reaction is responsible for a large amount of the oxidative stress in our body. So we're finding that molasses has the ability to block that reaction. So I want to recap here because it's very important you know when to use it and when not. Use it with lunch, with a high starch meal, not with a high sugar meal. If you use it with sugar, you're not going to get the same effect. Why? Because the molasses is designed to aid in the starches, right? It's going to help slow the digestion of the starches, but it's not going to help you when you're adding it on top of regular sugar. That's just going to increase the glucose load and stress you more as far as insulin is concerned. So you want to use it with starchy meals. So maybe you're having pasta or a sandwich or something that's lower or slower digesting. That's the best time to use it. I would avoid using it with dinner. If you did want to use it with breakfast, you'd want it to add it to something that's already low glycemic. So if that was the case, maybe you'd want to add it to maybe some oatmeal or something like that if that's what you're eating. Or adding it with a little bit of yogurt might not be a bad idea, with some yogurt and some fruit. I did some other videos talking about things like maple syrup and honey. I put those videos there if you want to check them out, because that breaks down how to use maple syrup and honey instead of sugar and the time in which to do that. As always, I'll see you tomorrow.